Hi everyone, welcome to this week's lesson. We're going to be looking at different types of cast shadows today, or at least how cast shadows are affected by the nature of the light source and their relationship to it. It's really useful getting to know how cast shadows work because they help create a nice sense of illusion, and they kind of provide a lot of information about what's going on in terms of lighting and relationship between shapes within a drawing or painting. The main thing that we want to think about when we're working with cast shadows is how soft the shadow is. That's the primary thing, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. The softness of the shadow tends to be affected by the strength of the light source and the consistency of the direction of the rays, and also by the distance away from the light source, and they're kind of linked in a way. So to kind of demonstrate this, initially what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw 3 fairly small circles on my paper. Actually, I'm going to do this one at a different height. So we're going to imagine that these are all kind of balls or something like that. They're all hovering above the ground and below a light source which is coming from up here. So I'm not going to do any form on these balls. What we're looking at, if this is our ground plane that they're hovering above, just here. So it's kind of in this space here. This is the wall behind them. And as I say, this is a little light source. So there's some light coming from that light source up here. So actually I'm going to shift this one slightly so that if we imagine the light source would be kind of radiating out like this, we want our balls to fit within that space, so we'll put this one just here. So if the object is close to the surface that it's casting a shadow on, so in this case this ball is much lower than the others, it's also directly below the light source, so the shadow is just going to hover, be the same size, directly below the light. That's because we've got all these light rays traveling down and they're being blocked by this ball, which is causing the shadow to be cast on the ground. So if I fill that in, it's fairly clear the way the light rays travel past. I can figure out it's going to be casting a fairly sharp shadow on the ground. That's because these light rays are all traveling consistently. They're close to the surface that the shadow is being cast on, so it feels like it's hovering high up. Now the second one I'm going to work on is this ball here is further away, so the light rays radiate out more, so they're going to hit the ground somewhere over here. But because the light rays are traveling past and then they're having to travel for longer, it's less clear where they're hitting the ground, or they're less consistent, which means that we get a softening of the shadow. So that shadow becomes softer than this one. This is a hard shadow. And finally, this last ball is even higher up. It's close to the light source, but then that means that this light radiating out is going to be quite broad when it actually hits the ground over here. So that's going to be a really soft shadow shape. So the center of it might be dark like the other ones, but as it radiates out, it's going to get softer and softer and just really subtly taper into the surrounding ground. Like that. So you can see we're getting progressively, can make it even softer actually, we're getting progressively softer the further away from the surface that the light is being cast on, the object gets. If we had another little ball hovering pretty much sitting on the ground here, then that can be super sharp. That might be this sharp, let's say. So it's got no softening whatsoever. So that's kind of to get us started thinking about how the shadow that's cast on the ground is affected by the relationship between the object and the surface that it's casting a shadow on. Hopefully that makes sense. Something I recommend messing around with. As an example, if we look at, oh, it's a bit too soft, this light. I was going to say you could look at these cast shadows from the light, but unfortunately it's a bit too good, this light that I'm using, so it's not too obvious. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. It's something that you can mess around with. If you have a light source, you can place objects on the light source and move it away, like closer or further away. Let me have a look actually. If I lift this eraser, there we go, actually this is better. So if I lift this eraser, you can see at the moment we've got a sharp edge just there. But as I lift up, do you see the central dark part of the shadow is getting smaller, but the overall size of the shadow is getting larger, but it's getting softer as well. So you see I go down and it gets hard, lift up and it gets soft. That's what's going on with these balls in the drawing. So I recommend messing around with that. You can use an object like an egg or a piece of fruit or a bottle or something with a light source, and just kind of experiment. And you don't even have to draw it, you just have to observe. So spend time observing shadows. It's a really useful little exercise. You can do it when you don't have any drawing equipment with you. Just sit and look at how shadows are operating. Now, a kind of extension of this concept that relates to the difference between types of light sources is when you have a spotlight rather than a more general kind of ambient light. So a spotlight sends light rays all in the same direction, all parallel or roughly parallel, kind of radiating out from a central point. The shadow will tend to be harder like this because we've got this light that's traveling out. It's very clear where it's going in terms of direction of light. If you had a more kind of ambient light, the shadows will generally be softer. The clearest example of this beyond kind of messing around with different types of artificial lights is if you look at shadows on the ground outside on a sunny day. They're very sharp like this. Everything has super sharp shadows because the light rays are all just coming directly from the sun. But on a cloudy day, if the sun's here, this is the best way to imagine it. So you've got, slide this over. We've got our sun on a sunny day in this scenario. We've got a tree here. So the sun's rays are all coming straight down. So the tree is going to cast, similar to here, the tree is going to cast a pretty hard shadow. So it's going to cast a hard shadow on the ground there. The foliage might cast a hard shadow down onto the trunk of the tree. But if we move across and we have a different day, so this is a sunny day and this is going to be a cloudy day. The sun is still obviously the light source on a cloudy day, so it's up in the sky, well, very far away in the sky. But we've got, if you've ever been on a plane and you've kind of flown over a cloudy day, so you have clouds, a bank of clouds sitting over the top of a landscape, of the land below. They're blocking the light source. But clouds are just made up of water vapor, so the light can still travel through the clouds. And what happens is all these light rays are coming down, traveling through this cloud vapor, but they're hitting little droplets and they're bouncing around all over the place, so they get scattered around all these light rays. So when they come out of the cloud, they come out in all sorts of different directions. There's no consistent direction of light. So here, all the light rays are roughly traveling just straight down, all in a row. So if the sun is directly above, like at midday, everything will cast a very small shadow just below it. Something like this, let's say. So everything's going to cast a fairly sharp, harsh shadow, caused by all these rays that are traveling roughly parallel to each other. On a cloudy day, the light rays are initially traveling into the cloud in the same direction, but they're getting scattered around. So you get all these scattered light rays. So they don't know which way they're going. And that means that if you have a similar tree or the same tree standing like this on a cloudy day, your shadows will still be there, because generally this tree is going to block the light from hitting the ground. But the light rays are a lot more scattered, so it's going to be a much softer shadow, similar to this sort of soft shadow. So that's another thing you can look out for next time you see, particularly a day that's, say, sunny and then cloudy, or cloudy and then sunny. Look at how the shadows change and how it affects the appearance of the cast shadows. It affects all other types of shadows as well, but today we're just looking at cast shadows. So you can see all of our shadows are much softer in this situation than in this situation. And it can actually make, when you're doing landscape painting, I prefer painting on cloudy days because you get these nice sort of soft, subtle shadows, whereas you get much harsher shadows on sunny days. So that's a kind of real world application of this particular concept. So it's a similar sort of idea. So the closer that this object gets to the ground, the more the light rays are all consistent, or moving in a consistent direction, so the shadow becomes harsher. The further away it gets from the ground, the more the light rays kind of spread out and they're not as even, so they become softer. But in the case of a cloudy day, everything has fairly soft shadows, but still things that are higher up will have even softer shadows than things that are closer to the surface that's have a shadow cast on it. So if there was a bird flying above, it'll have a really soft, barely perceptible shadow on the ground. Whereas if a bird was flying in this scenario, you'd see the sharp outline of the bird that's flying above. Whereas in this scenario, you just get a kind of soft, fuzzy thing if you saw anything at all. So the final thing we want to think about with shadows, and this is another kind of nice, subtle development of these ideas, is if you have a light source coming from the side. So let's say pick a fairly simple shape here. We've got a jar, like a ceramic jar or something like that, or a can, or something, just an opaque vessel of some description, sitting on the ground here. And then we've got our light source out on this side, so our light's radiating out, and it's kind of to the side of this jar. It means that the shadow, as we know, is going to kind of travel out in this direction, and let's say it would roughly make this sort of shape. Now you could fill this shape in and make it all even, so let's do it kind of softly. So we use this edge that we've decided on. So it's just got a hard edge, all consistent all the way along, and that works okay. But what's more realistic is as the shadow moves further away from the object, so similar to this scenario with the balls, so the same cast shadow moves further away from this jar, it's going to get softer. So it starts with this basic kind of sharp shadow, but it's going to be deepest as a shadow nearer the jar. As it moves away, it's going to soften out. And we're also going to start making it gradually softer as it gets further away from the object. So as we get out here, it's going to be really fuzzy. So you can spend quite some time working on these sorts of shadows, these cast shadows, moving away from the light source. So move back in a bit, get closer, get sharper. And then as we move away, getting softer and softer. You can work, I'm going to work a little bit back into this actually because it's getting a little bit too big, this shadow. So it takes time, this kind of building this sort of shadow. You can smudge it as well. If you're working in paint, you can use blending brushes to blur it. I'm kind of just using the eraser a bit here. Use my fingers a little to soften it out. So I'm just trying to make it softer and softer as it's moving out, so it's kind of filtering away and becoming progressively more and more blurry from this sharp initial point. It's not the most accurate shadow in the world. So if I was working from a real object, I'd be kind of observing exactly what width, how it changes and that sort of thing. But the main thing I want you guys to take away is just that thinking about how quickly does it get softer, how much softer does it get, that sort of thing. Because it really helps to add to the realism and a sense of, you know, what this light source is. So it's really a great thing to kind of get to grips with. Yeah, something, again, another thing to mess around with, another little exercise to do. I'll write it on our accompanying notes for this one. So yeah, it's softened out kind of nicely. It takes a little while to build up or kind of get to grips with any given shadow. But you can do them from your imagination, you can use a reference, either way is fine. The main thing is just practicing that concept of things softening out, thinking about how the shadow alters as it moves away from the light source. And it's primarily just how soft the shadow is. So the shape of the shadow doesn't change enormously, it's just how it softens out from its central darkest point. So the size of it and how sharp or how soft it is. That's all we're thinking about. So hopefully that was a helpful lesson. Just spin that around so we can have a look. Yeah, hopefully that was good. It's really important to understand these concepts when you're working with shadows. We'll be doing a few more covering different types of shadows, so probably just one more actually. We'll look at form shadows rather than cast shadows. This one we're obviously looking at shadows that are cast on the ground or on a surface by another object. But we'll start looking at how form shadows work as well, and how different types of form shadows represent different types of forms, which is another really important aspect of shadows. But this is a little bit simpler to kind of get to grips with. It's a fairly straightforward concept, that idea of the nature of the light rays and then the distance between objects and how that affects shadows. But yeah, I'll be adding a accompanying document to the blog and to the OCAD course page with some little tips about how you can practice this exercise and general overview of the concepts discussed. As always, follow the YouTube channel for more videos like this and to watch all our previous videos. And if you click the link through, you can sign up to OCAD Studio and you get personal tuition from myself and a range of specialist tutors with any kind of work that you want to do. So yeah, have a look at that, and I'll see you guys soon.